This is TWiT.
Apple is working on adding touchscreens to its Mac computers. But it won't be, don't get your hopes up, it's not going to be today. It's not going to be next year. It's going to be in 2025 as part of a larger update to the MacBook Pro, according to the people who asked not to be identified because the plans are private.
Yeah, but I'm glad that if this is true, I'm glad that Apple's breaking what is currently a serious dogma. It's not, I don't think that they seriously think about how the Mac could be enhanced with screen displays. I don't think they've done what they've historically done, which is look at what has been done with touch screen displays on Windows and looked at what works and what doesn't work and put their own spin on it. I do think that they've been trapped by dogma, saying that our touch screen operating system is iPad OS for large screens. Mac OS is not a touchscreen OS. When we have seen how really wonderful touchscreen on a large screen can actually be. And we were just talking I was just saying last week that if Apple ever came out with an iPad, a Macintosh and an iPad Pro form factor, oh my God, would I be first in line to buy something like that? Because all the advantages of this tiny little thin thing that has a clip-on typable keyboard with the ability to simply freestyle it on the sofa and still be able to run Mac full desktop apps instead of having to deal with what you got to deal with when you're running iPad OS. Oh my God, I'd be so quick in line for that.
I suppose it'd be nice to have the choice, but I do notice that like this desktop has touch, but I never use it. And it's that gorilla arm thing, as Mike Sargent calls it, where you know.
I mean, I think that's really short-sighted. No pun intended. Because the idea is that it doesn't work because I'm not going to be taking my hands off the keyboard to do a touch. Taking my hands off the keyboard to do a touch. Let's not forget that we're not that far away from when Apple said, "Hey, take your hands off the keyboard to look at this little touch bar, to hit this little touch bar above the keyboard." And also, it's not necessarily if I have a trackpad between my hands, I'm going to be using it. If I got a mouse under my hand, I'm going to be using it. What it's good for is when you are literally just trying to scroll. There are times, even when I'm using my iPad, when I switch to the iPad, my MacBook, and I will just almost reflexively reach in to scroll, pinch, and zoom, because that's the way that I interact with screens these days. I would at least like to see Apple look at what a Mac can be with a touchscreen. I think they would come up with something that would really bring things forward and make me less jealous at times when I look at exciting form factors in the Windows space of laptops.
Right. There are two paths for them here, right? There is this conservative path, which I agree about. I mean, Gorilla Arms is about spending all day with your arms extended, touching a screen that's perpendicular to your keyboard. And okay, of course not. But using one of those laptops, it's all second nature to literally everybody now, that you see a dialog box on screen and you want to tap it closed, or you want to just move a finger on the screen and flick it to flick up the web browser. And that is not a Gorilla Arms gesture. It's a very simple gesture. And they're not going to take the trackpad away. It's just an additional input method. That's a very conservative path for Apple to walk, but I feel like they could walk it. And, every year that passes, there are more people out there who think of touch as being something that should be on every single screen in existence. The other path is what Andy says, which is if you've got a touch screen, you can, Apple hasn't made a new looking MacBook for 12, 13 years. Yeah. And I think they've kind of perfected the perpendicular laptop thing, but on the Windows side with touch, you end up with this scenario where it's like, well, what if I folded the keyboard back? Yeah. Or what if I detached the keyboard? And Apple has not ever been able to play in that space on the Mac, only on the iPad, because of the lack of touch. And I don't know whether they will choose to go down that path, but boy, I also would be very interested in seeing what would happen if Apple said, what if we had a Mac OS laptop that you could pull a keyboard off of and use with Apple Pencil and Touch? That would be really interesting.
I just wonder when the iPad just runs Mac OS. They're coming so close together. And the thing is, now that we have Resolve running on the iPad, and you can hack it so that it opens up the other windows that aren't released yet, it's obvious that these two things developing for both of these starts to come together. So maybe they have the Mac do that, but maybe you just have something that's a little bit more beefy than the iPad Pro that is otherwise, run something. I just feel like the two of them are coming together very, very close together now. Yeah,
there are a lot of people who use Macs as drawing tablets with a Cintiq screen attached to it, and so the idea of having that, well, no, don't buy this external display that kind of puts some distance between you and the content. here is a 16-inch or even an 18-inch or a 20-inch Mac that will work with Apple Pencil. A lot of creatives, video editing, even video editors, but certainly artists, designers would absolutely go in for that.
Well, and I think that when you do that, though, to the point that was made earlier is that you want to get rid of the keyboard. So if you want to start drawing, you want to pull that off. True. And have it be something that you're drawing on. The keyboard is part of what makes the quote unquote gorilla arms is reaching over this keyboard. So I think that if Apple goes to a point where a MacBook does that, it just feels like it's just a bigger iPad at some point, like that gives you the Mac OS running on it. It's detachable. You have a detachable keyboard that you can draw on and do all the other things. And that would be amazing. Like it would be really cool.
I think I'm with Jason, but I think they could figure some things out. And I mean, as we're discussing this, I could think about all the times when the original Mac was kind of dismissed that, hey, people don't want to take their hands off the keyboard to keep touching this mouse thing off the side and say, well, imagine a world in which apps are designed for the mouse and designed to be used that way. Think about all the times when all you're doing is you're scrolling anyway, or using the page up, page down keys on the keyboard anyway. Couldn't that be easier? So these are questions that are being answered really, really well on Chrome OS and on Windows. I would love to see, again, Apple investigate that on the Mac, because I think they could do some really great stuff.
And my question isn't actually, Alex said, what about the iPad? I actually start to think about it from the other direction, which is, what about the Mac? Like the iPad Pro, not the base level iPad that is used so commonly, but that iPad Pro that Apple, and I love the iPad Pro, but like Apple has invested so much time, so many resources in making a more Finder-like Files app and inventing a pointer, which is a great pointer, and trying to do like Driver Kit. And they built the Magic Keyboard to give it a keyboard and a trackpad. They've done all this stuff to sort of make it like a laptop, but they can never quite get there because it's hard for something that was built around being all touch and originally being an iPhone to do that. And I wonder at some point if you might not say, what if we approach this from the Mac side? And what if all the work we've done on the iPad allows us to create a better tablet mode on Mac OS that runs iPad apps and Mac apps or whatever? And not to say this is easy. This is all really hard stuff that would take years. But I wonder, there's a possibility, at least, that inside Apple, they've looked at this and said, maybe we went around about this from the wrong direction.
Or maybe they started thinking about it.
That's what
15 years ago.
Saying, maybe. But I mean, he says it's not going to be out for 2 years. I think he's kind of saying that glacial movement towards that has produced a product, but it's going to take a while. You think they've been doing it for 15 years, Alex?
Maybe 10.
Really?
At least 10.
You think people internally have been looking at it? And was it the executives? Was it Steve Jobs who kept it from happening?
I don't think anyone's kept it from happening. I think merging the two operating systems is really complicated.
Oh, you're talking about merging, not touch on Mac OS, but you're talking about merging.
I'm saying that having the two of them coming together, not to be maybe one OS, but you now have a unified hardware infrastructure. You have a unified. There's a lot.
We've certainly moved a long way.
A lot of things that took a long time.
Yeah.
To
that M2 Air and the M2 iPad Pro are basically the same, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet one of them runs one OS and one runs the other, and they have some apps in common. And let's not forget the opportunity cost sort of that's lost here, which is, if you say artificially the Mac can never be anything but a standard laptop and all other things must be handled by the iPad. I mean, why? Why does it have to be that way? But they have steadfastly up to now said that has to be the case. And as much as I like the iPad, you can't deny the fact that they have tried so hard to make it like the Mac, and that there's probably somebody on the other side saying, or what if it was the Mac and had a simplified iPad mode for certain circumstances, instead of trying to shove all of this stuff into iPad OS where maybe it's just not a great fit?
Well, and I think that the other thing is that I don't think that the Mac OS is going away, but I think that to Jason's point, that we just get to a point where we want to run Mac apps, on the iPad and just go full screen and do what we're going to do. Because we're already running the iPad apps on the Mac, and we do that all the time. Like Mix Effect Pro, which is something we use a lot, is we just run them on Mac Minis because it's a lot more, it's a lot easier to sit in a server than an iPad is. And so, and running iPad apps on a Mac went from, this is really cool, to, I can't believe you're not doing it. Like you immediately like, oh. And then when you start looking at Resolve, I think Resolve is the first real app that you go, oh, like that's a real hard to do Mac app that is running on a iPad, and And I think that is, I just think that we're 1 or 2 iPads away from you just being able to switch the iPad mode to Mac OS
right. Yeah. Or MacBooks away, right? Because it might not be an iPad, because I think there are going to be iPads that aren't Macs for a long time, if not forever, because I think it is a successful product at the lower end. But at that high end, like, start to think about it. It's not even it's a Mac that can have an iPad mode, not an iPad that runs Mac OS. But they're all the same.
Remember what happened when Microsoft did that to Windows 8.1, and it was a disaster where they had and they still do, by the way, but they've hidden it deep within Windows, have a tablet mode. It really,
but they did it a lot faster. They did it a lot faster than Apple's doing.
I mean, and I think the people at Apple probably looked over the hedge there and said, well, we got to be careful not to do that to ourselves.
Yeah. But to their credit, they did bounce back really well with Windows 10 and Windows 11. Yeah. It switches. I think that Windows 10 and 11, and also actually Android, does a really good job of explaining how you can design a unified interface that makes as much sense with touch pen and with trackpad as
so maybe that's been solved
as any other. And I think that I think that one of the things that made me really happy to see, they think he's predicting it 2 years out. It would imply for me that it will accompany and also an overhaul to the Macintosh user interface, so that not to make it dumber and more iPad-like, but to give it some of the qualities that those other 2 operating systems have, where you don't really notice necessarily that the buttons you're clicking on with the trackpad and the mouse and the handles for moving windows around are all that different. But once you switch into touch mode, you notice that, wow, those touch targets are a lot easier to get to. The low layer interface that tries to figure out what you're trying to tap with a mouse becomes a lot more complicated, because now it has to figure out how you're going to hit a target with a much more blunt instrument, so to speak. So I think that while I'm not really a fan of the whole, at one point these 2 operating systems are going to become one thing, I do believe that, as it's been doing for the past 5 or 6 or 7 years, they're all going to continue to grow from each other, so that someone who is switching from one to another over the course of the workday will feel as though they're having one seamless experience.
I may be not as convinced as y'all are. I'm surprised, actually. I know I must touch my screen because I have fingerprints on my MacBook, but it's unconscious. I feel like what Apple's doing, which is interesting, is moving the apps from the iPad and iPhone to the desktop without just making the operating systems compatible is probably 90% of it, isn't it? If you can get the iOS apps on your desktop, I guess you still need touch for some of them. And
well, aren't we already kind of seeing that with the ability to have my iPad Pro right next to my MacBook screen, just simply roll my pointer off of one screen and onto the other, and not really be aware that now I'm in not screen mirroring mode or screen extension mode, but I'm actually running iPad OS off of the same keyboard and mouse.
I wonder what their plan is. I really do. Anyway, it's an interesting data point from Mark Gurman, and I think something worth talking about.
Hey, I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief of Ad Astra Magazine, and each week I join with my co-host to bring you This Week in Space, the latest and greatest news from the final frontier. We talk to NASA chiefs, space scientists, engineers, educators, and artists, and sometimes we just shoot the breeze over what's hot and what's not in space, books, and TV. And we do it all for you, our fellow true believers. So whether you're an armchair adventurer or waiting for your turn to grab a slot in Elon's Mars rocket, join us on This Week in Space and be part of the greatest adventure of all time.